What is communism? In the United States, anti-communism is almost like a religion. Oftentimes, serious misconceptions about what communism is, right down to the meaning of the word itself, are rampant. In order for us to come to an understanding of how communism can benefit Black people, it is important for us to understand, first, what communism is. Communism is a moneyless, stateless, classless society, international in nature, that is free from the oppression of person by person. This is the communist idea, and it comes to fruition through the concrete struggles of the oppressor against the oppressor. There are many of such struggles throughout the world, but in the case of Black people, in order to get free, we must struggle against white supremacy and capitalism. Our struggle, too, is part of the international struggle for a better world. Communism represents the ultimate goal of our liberation struggle, our fight for a world in which there are no more oppressors, and as a consequence of this, there are no oppressed either. So let's get free.
Most of us are workers in some way, or exploited or disenfranchised because of the capitalist system, so communism has some relevance to us. The question of race and racism can't be separated from capitalism and vice versa. The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in minds of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the East Indies, the turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins signaled the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. These idyllic proceedings are the chief moments of primitive accumulation. On their heels tread the commercial war of the European nations with the globe as a theater. Direct slavery is just as much the pivot of bourgeois industry as machinery, credits, etc. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery that has given the colonies their value. It is the colonies that have created world trade. And it is world trade that is the precondition of large-scale industry. Thus, slavery is an economic category of the greatest importance. Without slavery, North America, the most progressive of countries, will be transformed into a patriarchal country. Wipe out North America from the map of the world, and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization. Cause slavery to disappear, and you will have wiped America off the map of nations. Thus, slavery, because it is an economic category, has always existed among the institution of peoples. Modern nations have been able only to disguise slavery in their own countries, but they have imposed it without disguise upon the New World. Though European writers like Marx and Lenin have contributed to communism, many Black theorists have also expanded communist thought. Many have pointed to the fact that Black people were living in communism before communism in its various forms of Marxist or anarchist thought arose in Europe. Many pre-colonial societies could be described as communist, quote unquote, in one way or another. Human beings haven't always lived in exploitative, hierarchical societies. However, we must recognize the present state of things, plus in the recent past where Black people have lived and developed hierarchy and dealt with societal oppression within their own societies. Feudalism existed in some parts of Africa before colonization, and feudalism involves a deep and exploitative social stratification founded on the ownership of land. It must also be noted that slavery existed in Africa before European colonization, although the earlier European contact gave slavery in Africa some of its most vicious characteristics. Theorists like Angela Davis have sought to give an analysis of capitalism, racism, and sexism as it relates to Black women. Black communist women in the 1930s and 40s were integral to the success of the Communist Party in the Black community. We need to articulate the real class situation of persons who are not merely raceless, sexless workers, but for whom racial and sexual oppression are significant determinants in their working and economic lives. Although we are in essential agreement with Marxist theory as it applied to the very specific economic relationships he analyzed, we know that his analysis must be extended further in order for us to understand our specific economic situation as Black women. Black communists have fought against both racism and capitalism. Black communists have fought against lynching, discrimination in unions, class oppression, state repression, and have often been repressed for it. The far right often made the connection to communism and the civil rights movement. Much of this was fear and propaganda, but in the decades prior, communists were actually integral to anti-racist efforts. Communists engaged in fronts with other black organizations to fight against segregation and racial discrimination. Many white supremacists remembered this and associated any fight against segregation and racism as communist. While liberal black organizations often took moderate steps, communists were more willing to be bold, organizing the black poor and workers alongside radical intellectuals to lead the movement rather than the black professional class or the black bourgeoisie that often compromised with the state.
Many anti-colonial revolutions were spearheaded by communists, and one thing that a lot of people don't know is that a lot of the greatest black freedom fighters of all times were communists. W.E.B. Du Bois was a communist, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was communist, many African and Afro-Caribbean revolutionaries were communists, and so on and so on. Number 1. Huey P. Newton. It is a fairly well-known fact that Huey P. was the co-founder and leader of the legendary Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, which was probably the most successful, innovative, and influential of all the left-wing groups formed in the United States during the turbulent 60s. What many people don't know about Huey P. is that he was a convinced Marxist, and the party he led was a communist one. In his book, Revolutionary Suicide, Huey P. Newton once wrote the following on the topic of capitalism. If the world does not change, all its people will be threatened by the greed, exploitation, and violence of the power structure in the American empire. The handwriting is on the wall. The United States is jeopardizing its own existence and the existence of all humanity. If Americans knew the disasters that lay ahead, they would transform the society tomorrow for their own preservation. The Black Panther Party is in the vanguard of the revolution that seeks to relieve this country of its crushing burden of guilt. We are determined to establish true equality and the means of creative work. Black communists and white communists alike now consider Huey P. Newton's Black Panther Party to be one of, if not the most advanced communist organization the United States has ever seen. And many on the anti-capitalist and anti-racist left feel that all movements should study and learn from the experiences of the Black Panther Party. There are numerous reasons why such a veneration of the BPP exists among the left today, but one of the biggest reasons is without a doubt the party's praxis. The BPP was committed to serving the people, that is, meeting the needs of people in impoverished communities in a manner that subverted the capitalist mode of production. The Black Panthers provided free food, free clothing, free healthcare, and even free plumbing and maintenance services to people who could not afford those things otherwise. This was revolutionary methodology that created an enormous support base for the party among the masses. Unfortunately, the party's radical ideology and immense popularity eventually caught the attention of the United States government, which facilitated the complete destruction of the party through assassinations, infiltrations, and arrests that all formed part of the secret at the time COINTELPRO initiative. Huey P. Newton himself would be gunned down in Oakland sometime after the party's dissolution. However, neither Huey's death nor the destruction of his party could undo the achievements the party made, the memories of which still remain alive in the minds of all of the people the party served to this day. Number 2. W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois is a household name in the United States. Most people know about his idea of the talented tenth or his renowned text, The Souls of Black Folk. But what many people do not know is that W.E.B. Du Bois was a Marxist. That fact may not be taught in schools very often, but it's true. W.E.B. Du Bois believed in the creation of a socialist society in which everyone, black or white, had a chance at life, and he frequently wrote polemics against groups of chauvinistic pseudo-socialists in the United States who were always ready to show their opposition to capitalism, but still shied away from standing up against racism as well. One such polemic was Du Bois's 1913 text, Socialism and the Negro Problem, in which he sums up his view on the meaning of socialism in the following quote. The essence of social democracy is that there shall be no excluded or exploited classes in the socialistic state, that there shall be no man or woman so poor, ignorant, or black not to count as one. W.E.B. Du Bois's socialist beliefs were no small phase in his life. In fact, when he was 93, he joined the Communist Party USA in protest of the policies of McCarthyism. Shortly after that, he left the United States entirely and moved to a newly independent Ghana, which was under the leadership of a socialist who will appear later on this list, Kwame Nkrumah. W.E.B. Du Bois died in Ghana at the ripe age of 95, and Nkrumah's government gave him a state funeral out of great respect for his life and work. Number 3. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was the first president of Ghana after it gained its independence from the United Kingdom, and he was a very influential socialist and Pan-Africanist. Nkrumah was a leader of the Ghanaian independence struggle, and after the victory of that struggle, he was of course elected leader of the new nation, which was the first one to attain liberation from colonial domination in all of Africa. Kwame Nkrumah was also a radical theorist in his own right, and is well known for his theoretical text, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, in which he coined and defined the term neocolonialism as the method by which the colonizing countries that used to hold direct control over nations in the global south managed to maintain economic control over said nations even after decolonization. While Nkrumah's dream of an independent Africa united by an explicitly socialist supranational government was never achieved, many achievements were made during Ghana's advancement towards socialism under the Nkrumah presidency. An example of the achievements of his government in the realm of education is described in depth in the following quote from the text, The Political and Social Thought of Kwame Nkrumah by Ama Bini. Education had an instrumentalist function and motivational purpose. Its aims were not only to produce skilled workers, but also to forge a nationalist and socialist consciousness among all Ghanaians. As a result, there was the introduction of fee-free elementary education, teacher training, and university education. Free textbooks, the expansion of university facilities, all were evidence of the high premium Nkrumah placed on education. In this endeavor, Nkrumah also focused on the education of women, whom he considered the architects of the nation. Like his mentor Agre, he believed that educating women meant the education of a whole nation. The Accelerated Development Plan for Education, which had been introduced in 1952, reflected this ambition. From 1952 to 1961, there was a tremendous increase in the numbers of public, primary, and secondary schools. It was the 1961 Education Act that made education compulsory for school-age children and also girls, which consequently increased enrollment figures. The access of girls from poorer socioeconomic backgrounds was increased under Nkrumah's government. Around 1965 to 1966, girls constituted 44% of total primary school enrollment, 35% in middle school, and 25% at secondary school. More young women also entered higher institutions of learning and were sent abroad with men to train in the professions. Nkrumah's fight to prevent Ghana from being subjugated to a neo-colonial relationship with the imperialist countries by putting Ghana on the road to economic independence and socialist development were not in line with the business interests of those countries. It is for this reason that Nkrumah's government became one of the first to meet the same fate as the ones met by many socialistic African governments that arose after the Ghanaian one. That is, it was overthrown in a coup backed by the developed countries it antagonized. Nkrumah was not killed in this coup, however, and even accepted an offer to be the honorary co-president to Ahmed Sékou Touré, who was the president of Guinea at the time. It was in Guinea that Nkrumah would spend the rest of his life in exile, forced to sit idly by as the tendrils of neo-colonial exploitation he had spent so much time trying to stave off crept their way into the homeland that he could never return to.
Assata Shakur is a very influential black revolutionary that many activists look up to today. In 1971, she changed her name to Assata Shakur and identified as an African. She was a member of the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panther Party for self-defense throughout the 1970s. She criticized the BPP for its machismo that she saw in the organization and was a frequent critic of patriarchy in the movement. Shakur was arrested and accused of first-degree murder in 1977, and she was later liberated by her comrades a few years later. She would find refuge in Cuba. The United States government has since been relentless in extraditing her back to America, but the Cuban government has refused to give up her whereabouts. Despite the obsessive hunt for her by the United States and the label of terrorist, she has been an inspiration to millions around the world. Her autobiography was republished in 2014 and sparked a repopularization of her name and story. She was not a lone revolutionary, as she had comrades not only in the Black Liberation Army, but all throughout the Black Liberation Movement, including the Republic of New Africa and other white revolutionaries who helped in her escape. Assata wrote in her autobiography, "I wasn't against communism, but I can't say I was for it either. At first, I viewed it suspiciously as some kind of white man's concoction, until I read works by African revolutionaries and studied the African liberation movements. Revolutionaries in Africa understood that the question of African liberation was not just a question of race, that even if they managed to get rid of white colonialists, if they didn't rid themselves of the capitalistic economic structure, the white colonialists would simply be replaced by black neo-colonialists. There was not a single liberation movement in Africa that was not fighting for socialism. The whole thing boiled down to a simple equation. Anything that has any kind of value is made, mined, grown, produced, and processed by working people. So why shouldn't working people collectively own that wealth? Why shouldn't working people own and control their resources? Capitalism meant that rich businessmen owned the wealth, while socialism meant that the people who made the wealth owned it.